And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the invitation to come speak to you today. This truly is an inclusive event, considering that you have invited an American Jew from the San Fernando Valley to come talk to you. It is incumbent upon everybody talking about social media to start with some statistics about how big this social media thing is. I would be drummed out of the social media speaker corps if I didn't do that. I don't want to spend too much time on it, though, but it is important to put into context this world in which we live today. Here we are in Edmonton, in Alberta, in Canada, in North America, in the Northern Hemisphere, but let's face it, where we all really live is in Facebookistan. Right? When you consider that Facebook just announced last week that they have acquired their 900 millionth registered users, I mean, that is staggering. That's 1 out of every 7 people on the planet has a Facebook account. 1 out of every 6 minutes that everybody in the world spends online is spent on Facebook. That the purchases of 24% of the people on Facebook are influenced by what they're hearing from their peers and colleagues on Facebook, and that people are contributing 25 billion status updates every month. And this is just on Facebook. Let's not even talk about Twitter, or the number 3 social network right now. Anybody want to hazard a guess on the number 3 social network behind Facebook and Twitter? Pinterest. Believe it or not. More than half of the population of the planet Earth is under the age of 30 right now. And if you stop and think about that, these are people who have never known a minute without online communication, without this hyperconnectivity, the ability to reach out to anybody and everybody to talk about anything that interests them, to learn about anything that interests them at any time from wherever they happen to be. How do you think they feel about social media? To them, it is just the way they live their lives. They don't have to be in the office or in class in order to work or learn. They are always connected, they always have access to information, and they always have access to each other. More than half the population of the planet. And these are the people that we want to bring into our organizations now and start to elevate them through the ranks. As I did my research before coming here today, I found out that 72% of off-reserve Aboriginal peoples are online at least several times a week. In fact, the statistic I saw indicated that for Aboriginal peoples off-reserve, the amount of time that they spend online and their engagement in social media is on par with pretty much everybody else in North America. It's on reserve that we start to run into some issues. The numbers I saw indicated that fully half of the Aboriginal peoples living on reserve don't have access to the internet, and that is primarily because there is no broadband access or no mobile access being brought into those parts of the country. This is worrisome when you consider that next year or the year after, we're going to see more internet access taking place on phones, on mobile devices, than on tethered devices like laptops and desktop computers. And in many parts of the world, they're bypassing the wired infrastructure of cable or DSL or whatever technology coming into your house and going straight to cellular networks. Last year, I did an assignment for the Voice of America. I don't know if you know VOA. They're a quasi-governmental agency in the United States that is tasked with making sure that the American story is told objectively and accurately to the peoples and countries where America is being vilified by the leaders of those organizations. And I was brought in to help them figure out how to start taking advantage of social media. And as I met in this room with about 35 editors, rather grizzled and cynical editors of content, each responsible for a different part of the world, I was told that most of their audience really wasn't ready for social media. One of them said, our primary audience, one of our most important audiences, is in sub-Saharan Africa. And these are people who live in huts with dirt floors. They don't have internet access. They don't have computers. And I said, no, but they have mobile phones. In fact, mobile technology is the second largest industry in sub-Saharan Africa after mining. And whereas they may not have electricity in their huts, they do in fact have cell phone charging stations in the middle of the villages. And among the Aboriginal peoples who are using social media, according to the research that I found, in addition to using it for all of the things that everybody uses social media for, uploading funny pictures of cats with cute captions, this is what Aboriginal peoples are using it for. They're keeping in touch with each other when they go off reserves and out into the world. They're using it to fight the addiction that can be so prevalent on reserve. They're showcasing arts and crafts. In fact, when I did a search on Aboriginal in Pinterest, almost every pinboard I found was about Aboriginal arts. They're preserving cultural identity. In fact, I was intrigued to find that a lot of people are using Facebook and some other social media tools in order to preserve language and to continue to practice language and to teach language to others who are interested in preserving that part of the culture. They're also supporting political advocacy on behalf of the Aboriginal peoples and preserving that cultural identity. And they're doing this through not proprietary networks, but the ones that are generally available. This is the Aboriginal Relations Network on LinkedIn. It's pretty active, a lot of people there. I was intrigued to find that I actually have a first-degree connection to one of the people in this group. It's not the only one I found. I found the Aboriginal Professionals Network. In fact, I found a bunch. People are gravitating toward the communities that already exist in order to manage the parts of their lives that are sort of outside the world of their culture, but are also able to integrate their culture into those communities and to start to bleed out of one and into the other and start to have an impact and create greater awareness and understanding with the other communities in which they participate. Facebook as well, as the world's largest social network representing, if the population of Facebook made it a country, it would be the third largest country on the planet behind only China and India. That's a heck of a population to be participating in. But there's also an opportunity, which I really haven't seen in my research, to start to create some proprietary white label networks. Because what happens is that through Facebook and through LinkedIn and through some of the other social networks that are out there, people who are particularly passionate find that it's not quite enough. And they can be attracted into a network that is designed for those people who are particularly passionate. There are a lot of examples of this. This is just one example. This happens to be the do-it-yourself community for Home Depot. Now, Home Depot, of course, does have a Facebook page where people can come and ask questions and get good information. But for those hardcore do-it-yourselfers, it's not quite enough. And so they gravitate at the invitation of Home Depot, with the invitation often extended right there from within Facebook, to the proprietary white label forum, where they become more identified and more recognized for what they do. And there are a couple of interesting things that happen here. One is that the employees at Home Depot, and I'm not talking about people in the corporate communications department or PR folks, I'm talking about the guys who wear the orange aprons in the stores. They start participating in these communities too, and engaging and having conversations with the customers. For so many organizations, this is one of the great fears of social media, is that the employees and the customers are suddenly going to have direct contact, and oh boy, those employees could say some horrible things that will get us in trouble. In fact, what they do is become the recognized experts among the people who are not employees. And I think you can start to see the potential for you here. In order to bring those passionate people who are already engaged with your organizations into these discussions and have those conversations with the people that who are passionate, but you're trying to get more engaged, develop deeper levels of understanding. Like She Can Do It 22, who is just a woman who loves doing the home repair stuff. You can see her profile on the Home Depot network, and you can see her most recent contributions. Every single one of them starts with RE, colon. That means she's not initiating a conversation, she's answering somebody else's question. And by doing this, she has achieved the silver level. She is being recognized, not with coupons for product at Home Depot, not with money, not with bribes, but with an intrinsic reward that recognizes the value of her contributions. And you can see that she has posted 315 messages and tagged 228 different things. This is what we're able to do when we start to take advantage of the principles of social media in proprietary white label networks, is recognize those intrinsic rewards that really tend to motivate people. And as you're thinking through your internal communications, which was mentioned by one of the earlier speakers, consider the fact that you don't want to push a message out to employees. You want to have employees share these messages and these ideas with each other. This is what the intranet for people who worked inside Best Buy stores used to look like. You had to be a store worker. You couldn't be a corporate worker. It was called Blue Shirt Nation. They've migrated to something a whole lot more sophisticated. But tell you a little story about the power of people talking to each other as opposed to the voice of authority speaking down to people. For years in the United States, Best Buy had been trying to encourage the people who worked in the stores to invest in the company's 401k plan. Now, 401k is unique to the US as part of the Internal Revenue Code, as simply as I can possibly make it, because nothing in the Internal Revenue Code is simple. You could contribute a percentage of your income to a retirement fund that would not be taxed until you retired. And at that point, you're at a lower tax rate, and it was a way to save for retirement. It was important to the leaders of the organization that the non-highly compensated employees contribute to this, because you had to have a certain percentage of the low-paid population contribute before the highly compensated people were allowed to. And of course, they wanted to protect as much of their income from tax as possible. So for years, they had been running campaigns among the store workers at Best Buy. You can imagine what a tough sell that was. These are mostly people in their 20s who are not planning on being Best Buy salespeople for the rest of their lives. Many of them are in school. They're doing this until they can graduate, until they can find just that right job. They can't see the point of taking their $14, $15, $16 an hour that they're making, carving out a portion of that they're not going to be able to see until they're at least 55 and a half years old. So it never worked. No matter how slick and creative and inventive the campaign was, it never worked. And then after the Blue Shirt Nation launched, somebody got the idea of running a contest where employees who worked in the stores who were investing in the 401k plan would tell their peers why they were doing it. So not a word from the leadership of the organization or the benefits department or the HR department. It was all peer-to-peer communication. They were hearing from somebody like themselves, and they experienced a 40% increase in investments in the 401k plan, because this is whom we trust, is people like us. And it's also because we are motivated by intrinsic rewards. Dr. Broken Leg stole part of my presentation this morning when he talked about autonomy and mastery as the things that really drive us. We're not driven to do anything that requires any kind of cognitive activity based on bribes and rewards. I'm working with one organization right now. They have an ambassador program of employees who are trained to participate in social media on behalf of the organization in very candid, transparent, and authentic ways. And they've hired a PR agency to come in and help them take this ambassador group to the next level. And they said, we know we'll reward them based on the number of posts they make with coupons good for product. I banged my head on the desk saying that's counterproductive. At the point where you're bribing people to do this, they don't want to do it anymore. Why do they want to do it? Ultimately, it's the last thing on the list. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves that really, really matters to people. This is what we want to do. We want to be left on our own in our teams with the people that we are collaborating with to figure out how to accomplish something, to really master what it takes to overcome that obstacle, to achieve that challenge. This is what makes work satisfying. Work in the real world tends to be very unsatisfying. You sort of trudge on. You never really get to see the tangible results of what you have done. Failure is disappointing and depressing. You really have very little hope of experiencing success on a regular and routine basis. You're in your cube, occasionally get to go to a meeting. Oh boy. Right? And of course, you're told what to do. If anybody looking at this recognizes what kind of activity this list lends itself to, shout it out. It's video games. This is why people will spend thousands of hours at their Xbox or their Nintendo playing games, is because it satisfies all those desires that we don't get out of the real world. And what we can do with social media and some of the tangents of social media, like this idea of social participatory gaming, is provide people with these meaningful intrinsic rewards that lead them to take these kinds of actions and make the world a better place, make the workplace a better place. And we've seen lots and lots and lots of examples of this. I mentioned when I was talking about Best Buy that what really motivated people to finally pay attention and then dig into their paychecks and contribute a portion to their 401k plans was that they were hearing this from people like themselves. This is something that we have been hearing for years since social media started to appear on people's radar, is that we trust each other. We trust people like us more than we trust authority figures. Every year for the last 11 or 12 years, Edelman Public Relations has produced a study called the Edelman Trust Barometer. And what it continues to show, and this trend really accelerated in the 2012 study, is that you can see where it says if you heard information from a company from one of these people, how credible would the information be? Number 3, 65% said a person like yourself. Where is the CEO? Way down at the bottom, along with other official spokespeople. Now, you can have all kinds of conversation and arguments about why there is a low trust level among leaders and authoritative official spokespeople, but the simple fact is that we trust ourselves, we trust each other more than we trust virtually anybody else. And this has been borne out by a new Nielsen study on the state of media. What would lead you to trust what somebody says? Recommendations from people I know at the very, very top. Advertising, marketing, the kinds of collateral that we are so accustomed to producing as organizations, not so much. We have to start participating in the communities online. We have to start engaging with the audiences and getting our employees engaged in these conversations. As I was talking with Kelly and Peg in advance of coming here and speaking with you today, they shared with me your continuum. I got a copy of this as a PDF, and I printed it, and I looked at it, and I looked at it. Probably over 4 or 5 days, I kept returning to this, going, there is something incredibly familiar about this, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it, and then it dawned on me. This is the adoption path of the business world in social media. It is an exact parallel. It starts with indifference. Oh, it's just kids talking about what they had for dinner and how much they loved their favorite American Idol star. Right? And then it goes up to intimidation. Well, we realize we have to do this, but there's so many regulations and laws, and it really makes me afraid. So we're going to take little baby steps, and we're going to really listen to our lawyers. Then it's image. Well, as long as we're doing this, we'd better do it so it promotes the image we want the public to have of us. And it moves continually up this ladder until you get to integration and, could you just, I don't know what happened there. There we go. As you get up to the top, what you find is sort of the holy grail where most organizations are going. IBM is very familiar with this, did a brilliant white paper on the concept of social business. This is where we're going, is into this notion of social business, where it's not media, it's not communication stuff, it's not the contest on the Facebook page, it's not sending out the press releases in Twitter, but it's actually engaging in business where value is derived through the networks of people that you are part of. And more businesses are recognizing that this is the way that we have to go. I found a couple of great quotes when it comes to recruiting. The first one I like a lot that says, success in social networking is the defining element of the best practice recruitment marketing portfolio. But Augie Ray said the one that I really loved: brand management isn't about what you say you are, it's about who you are. And this was what makes HR the new marketing. We have entered an era of absolute transparency. And by the way, transparency doesn't mean throwing open all the windows and all the doors, right, and exposing all the company's information to absolutely everybody. From a business perspective, transparency means that you're making people and information accessible to your stakeholders so that they can make educated and informed decisions. But it also means that you're under a microscope as an organization, those of you who are here representing businesses, that if you think you're keeping secrets, somebody knows that secret. You would be shocked at what a Google search might reveal about your institution that you thought was well hidden and not available for the average person to see. And in this world of transparency, we have to be all about who we are, not what our collateral tells people that we are. Which means that you have to live the inclusion philosophy. It's not something you do to satisfy the CSR requirements of the business analysts. It's not something you do so that you continue to get that license to conduct business that we get from the public at large. It's something we do because it is actually who we are. You may remember back in 2010, PepsiCo made a big splash when they decided that they were going to, after something like 13 years, abandon their advertising during the Super Bowl. And people thought they were crazy. Well, what were they doing? They were doing what Indra Nooyi, the CEO of PepsiCo, in her heart deeply believes in, which is that we have to execute our purpose objectives in order to deliver performance. It's not performance and purpose. It's not performance or purpose. It's performance with purpose. It is Ms. Nooyi's belief that the only way that we succeed is from a foundation of ethical behavior and engagement in the community and behaviors that reflect the organization's desire to leave the world a better place than it found it. And they have a number of different dimensions of this that they work on. One of them is talent. We have a core belief that making the most diverse strengths and talents, making the most of diverse strengths and talents helps make our company successful. We take great care to weave diversity and inclusion into the very fabric of our culture to improve as a global, multicultural, and multi-generational company capable of serving the world's communities effectively. PepsiCo happens to be my largest client, and I know that this is not just talk. These are not just words on the wall. As it starts to spread through the organization, of course, you encounter resistance among some people. I've been with this company 30 years, and we sell sugar water, my God. But it's starting to make an impact because at the top of the organization, it is so firmly held as a core belief. And it's also why Ms. Nooyi is embracing social media, not claiming that she understands it. She's actually having members of her social media team come spend a half hour with her every couple of days and teaching her how to tweet and how to use Facebook. She understands that she needs to get familiar with all this stuff, but more important, she understands that it is through social media, in large part, that they're able to not only get the message out, but enact these principles. One of the things they did, they took that money that they spent on the Super Bowl and invested it instead in a social media effort where people could vote on where the money would go in terms of community projects that had absolutely nothing to do with selling food and drink products. Among recruiters, using social media has been identified as the most essential and long-lasting trend. And those of you who are out in the job market understand that social media these days is not only where you learn about the jobs, but it's how you establish that initial interaction. It's how you get intelligence about the organization you're considering joining. It's also where the company that is considering bringing you on board can learn more about you. So be very careful what you put in that Facebook profile. But 89% of companies used social media for recruiting last year, and that was up 6% from the year before. 65% have successfully hired through social media. 55% increased their investment in social media recruiting, and 56% have used it to source potential candidates. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on recruiting. I understand you've already had sessions on social recruiting, and there's a ton of material out there. As an organization, you can use social media as a channel to raise awareness, not just of what your own activities are and of your commitment, but of the issues that you hope your engagement in these communities and in these channels, the issues that you can have an effect on, and to bring more people into that discussion, and to bring more people into the community that wants to solve these problems and address these issues. Everything from a job post to a story that you want to tell about your organization fits into the category of what we're calling content objects. Every piece of content is an object. What can you do with an object? Well, first of all, you can share an object. And every piece of content that you produce in the social media era should be content that is shareable. There is still too much of a mentality that says this is our intellectual property and we're going to maintain copyright on it and prevent people from sharing it. Incredibly ineffective these days. You want people to share it because that's how it's going to get into the hands and the minds and the hearts of people who otherwise wouldn't see it. They would never make a trip over to your institutional web page. And by the way, the era of the institutional website is over. Doesn't mean that you don't need one, but it's not the main thing that you do anymore. The main thing is deploying content out for people to share and talk about. Because here's a truth from the digital era: if they are not talking about you, you don't exist. I'll give you a great example of that. I have a friend, very well known in public relations measurement circles. She has a large following on Twitter. Her laptop died. So she went out to her Twitter community and she said, I need a new laptop, what should I get? And in came all of the recommendations, which she gathered up. She did her research, she looked at the consumer reviews and the specs, she made a decision, she bought a laptop. She woke up the next morning and wondered, did Toshiba and Lenovo go out of business while I wasn't paying attention? Because nobody had recommended a Toshiba or a Lenovo laptop, she didn't even factor them into her thinking about what she was going to buy. If they're not talking about you, you don't exist. So how do you make a job posting part of a content marketing effort? Because this is what we need to do, whether we're talking about your products and services or your CSR efforts, including your inclusion initiatives. You could blog. This is what Hyatt Hotels does. This is a blog that talks about the culture of the organization. It's very authentic. It's written very conversationally. It's written by frontline employees. It's not talking about open jobs. It's talking about what it's like to work here. And certainly, this is an organization, as with any other, that's doing a culture blog as part of its recruiting effort. They really need to start thinking in terms of the inclusion message as an element of these blogs. The same thing from Roche, the pharmaceutical company. But this is my friend Scott Monty. Scott, this is his social media blog. Scott's very, very, very well known in social media circles. He runs social media for Ford Motor Company. A very brilliant guy. This just happens to be his personal blog, but he went to Ford Motor Company from an agency that he was working at. And after 6 months, he'd had enough of an impact that they said, well, we think there's something to this social media stuff. We think we want to expand the staff. So they posted a job for somebody to work for Scott. And it went through all the traditional places that you would post a new job listing. Well, Scott also posted it on his blog. And you can imagine what the official job listing read like versus, are you ready to open the door? If so, have I got an offer for you? It's been about 9 weeks since I joined the team at Ford Motor Company, and what a ride it's been. I'm working with an amazing team of people in communications. I get to tap into the strategic and creative brains at the social media group. I interact with teams from IT, marketing, product development, customer service, and many others. I'm responsible for leading the company forward in digital communications. Does this sound like something you'd like to be involved in? Then come work with me. Now, not only did he post this on his blog, where he had a sizable following, he tweeted a link to it on his Twitter account. There were 5 times more job applications coming from Scott's blog post than from the official listing of the job in the places where it appeared as a display ad and where it was available through some of the job sites that are out there. And in fact, they ended up hiring off of somebody who applied because they read it from Scott. We're going to talk more about the role of employees in a little bit. I do want to talk just for a second about video. Because a lot of organizations are still mired in the notion that to do video, we're going to have to bring in a production company and spend $45,000. And it just isn't true. The simple fact is that there are 24 hours of video being uploaded to YouTube every single minute. And very little of this, oh, right there would be great, thank you. Very little of this video is very high-end. And if you look at the videos that have millions and millions of views, most of them are not professional. Most of them are shot with a little flip-like camera or the camera in your phone. I saw a video that addressed a crisis and put it to bed at General Motors that a guy shot with his cell phone, and you can see his hand shaking. For GM, which knows how to make high-end commercials, to put this video up, a lot of people thought it was terrible, but you know what? It did its job. It got people to stop talking about this issue. They understood what the problem was, and it never really ascended to the level where the media made an issue out of it. This is a screen capture from a video from Morgan Stanley that features 3 people talking about diversity networks in the organization. You could go back to your office and produce one of these in about an hour and a half. This happens to be the Latino lady. There's also an African-American gentleman and another one who I can't remember what his heritage is, but he says him in 2 networks. One is this one, but the other one is also the gay, lesbian, bi, transgender network. If you don't have diversity networks that allow the people in your organization from within those communities to talk about work issues with each other, it's something to consider. And the thing is that I found kind of sad as I did some research into the diversity networks for here at Morgan Stanley and another one at ConAgra, is that I did not see Aboriginals as one of the populations for which these networks have been established. Another great way to tell the world that you're serious about this stuff. We have a problem, though, as we try to create awareness of what our organizations are doing, to let candidates know that this is an inclusive organization, to let the world know that this is an inclusive organization. And the problem is the volume of information that is out there that people can choose from. According to International Data Corporation, the amount of data produced last year on the World Wide Web, just last year alone, if burned to DVDs and mounted one on top of another on a spindle, would reach halfway from here to Mars. That's an awful lot of data, and the ability of search engines to help you get to the information that really is what you're looking for is diminishing. That gives us a new role in organizations, whether it's the council or the organizations that are part of the council. We have to become trusted guides to the information that we need people to see. We need to become media companies that produce content and deploy it in such a way that people will talk about it and share it and post the link to it on Twitter and share it on Facebook. Clay Shirky has said this is not a matter of information overload, it is filter failure. And our institutions need to become the filter to the good stuff, the really good stuff. There's a lot of different ways to do this. One of these is through content portals that we're seeing more and more organizations implement. They don't look like association or organizational websites. They don't look like corporate homepages. If anything, they look like the Wall Street Journal or other mainstream news outlets. The organizations that are doing this that range from American Express to Sun Life Financial to Intel, there are just more and more of them all the time, are hiring journalists, either on a freelance basis or bringing them into the organization, to tell the company's stories and to allow this information to be shared freely. In fact, most of them are smart enough to know that every piece of content that goes onto one of these content portals has to include an embed code that makes it drop dead easy for somebody else to put it into their blog or into their news portal or onto their website. Make it incredibly easy to share so more and more people will talk about it. This is one called Business Without Borders. It was launched by HSBC in order to tell the story about American businesses trying to establish footholds in the international business community. There's nothing in here that pitches HSBC as your banking partner of choice. There's nothing in here that sells or spins. It is just telling the stories of this effort. And I think that it is incumbent upon every organization to start to think of themselves as a media company in order to get those stories out there that people will talk about and will share. And I think one of the major stories that you need to tell is about the inclusion initiatives and the inclusion culture of your organization. It is probably also incumbent upon the council itself to become the filter for these kinds of stories so that we can get people talking about this. The more people talk about it, the less they're going to resist it or dismiss it, because it's part of the whole news and information environment that we live in. There is a fascinating trend that's happening right now. I don't know if anybody recognizes that icon. How many of you are on Instagram? A real phenomenon, a business with no business model and absolutely zero income just sold for $1 billion to Facebook. But what it tells us is that visual storytelling is a rising trend, and it's rising quickly. We are accustomed as human beings with tens and tens of thousands of years on this planet to experience the world visually as we walk through it. Over the last 100, 200 years, we've done less and less of that as we stay in one place for work and as we sit in our homes and watch TV. And what Instagram and photos on Facebook and the sharing of images is doing is allowing us to experience the world through visuals again. And organizations are starting to figure out that this is a great way to tell your story because we do experience things visually. Lots of opportunities. This is one of those Aboriginal Pinterest pin boards I found. What an opportunity to start to collect some of these, to identify some of the most passionate people who are contributing this kind of content, and to bring them into your fold and to bring them into your discussion, and to make them passionate about your missions and your objectives. But I've mentioned this a few times, and I'm going to leave you with this. The single most important thing that you can do as organizations engaging in social media is to tear down the wall between your employees and your external stakeholders. This fear that employees are going to say the wrong thing or cause problems for the organization denies the reality. McKinsey & Company has done a study, for those of you with industry in the room today, that has shown what they call a direct correlation between organizations in which employees and customers network with each other and increased market share. I know that market share is not the theme of this conference, but if you need to get the ear of the senior leaders of your organization, telling them that they're going to take market share from the competition is a great way to get their attention. And this message is clear. And there's more than one study that has shown this. And by the way, if people are concerned about productivity, I hear this all the time. If we let our employees on Facebook, they'll just play Farmville all day and they won't get their work done. There are at least 3 studies that show that people engaged in social media at work are more productive than employees who aren't. The range, if you look at the various studies, productivity is either 9 to 33% better among employees who have access to these channels. First of all, you have to understand that your employees who are living in Facebookistan have communities who know where your employees work. And people are asking questions about work. When I did a study for PepsiCo on this, we found that 68% of employees had been asked a question about PepsiCo by somebody in their social community. It could have been anything from, I'm thinking of applying for a job there, is it a good place to work, to, I've read about your sustainability efforts and I think you're full of crap. And the employees didn't know what to say. Now we have a program where employees are being trained so that they don't cause problems for the organization, they don't violate any regulations, they don't violate any copyright, they don't do anything that will get bad publicity, but at the same time, they are in their own personal and authentic voices raising awareness about the organization around the Performance with Purpose initiative, around the organization's dedication to diversity and inclusion and sustainability and other things that are important to you in this room. You also have employees who are sitting on the edge of their seats waiting to be activated. These are known as engaged employees. Engagement is something that's become a big deal in the last few decades, ever since Gallup identified a correlation between the size of your actively engaged population and your growth in market share. That's why every CEO is looking for engaged employees. Engagement means that they are looking to make discretionary effort for the organization outside of their own job responsibilities. How do you activate them? And this, I think, is where that whole notion of bringing them in as ambassadors to the organization, making sure they know what the rules of the road are so that they don't get the organization in any trouble, and turning them loose can do for the organization. I was in the Netherlands a couple weeks ago, and I heard a speech by Nick Jew, who is the CEO of ING Netherlands. This is a big financial services organization. And he says he does not block social access for any employee because they are his greatest ambassadors. And it would be crazy to shut off that kind of communication, because who do we trust? We trust people like ourselves. Who do we listen to? Who influences us? It's people like ourselves, and it's social media that has opened that channel up. So you have a number of organizations that are starting to recognize this and give employees semi-quasi-official spokesperson status. Sprint, which is a mobile carrier in the US, has a program called the Sprint Ninjas. You raise your hand and say, I want to be a ninja. They put you through training, and now you're able to engage online on behalf of Sprint. You could just be sharing some news and information from the organization, but you could also reach out to help somebody who has a complaint or a problem. I first learned of the ninjas when one of them helped resolve a problem that I had. I was so angry I tweeted it, and within 5 minutes one of the ninjas was there offering to help. And by the end of the day, the problem had been resolved. And it was through an employee, a real person like me, not the person on the customer service line who's reading from a script. This is Lionel Menchaca. Lionel's a friend of mine. He is the head of social media for the blogs and some of the other channels at Dell, the computer company. And you'll notice that he has the little Dell strip under his avatar on his Twitter profile. He has been through Dell training that makes him an official Dell representative in the social media space. This is not a special account, mind you. He doesn't have another Lionel account just for his personal stuff. He just has one. But he is able to engage about Dell. He's always sharing announcements. He's helping solve problems. There are about 80 or 90 employees at Dell who have gone through the level of training that provides them with that kind of capability. At Pepsi, they have this employee newsletter. It's email. It goes out every day. It's called Pepline. And what they have done with Pepline is they have said, you know, those articles that go into Pepline all go through legal review and approval to make sure that if they fall into the hands of the public, they won't cause any problems. That means they've already been approved for public consumption. So now, on every one of those articles, except the ones that deal with purely internal issues, and not because they don't want them shared, but just because nobody cares who's been appointed manager of this department, you can see that you have the share buttons. So employees, whether they've been trained or not, are now able to say, wow, look at this. I love rugby, and my company is one of the sponsors of the Rugby World Cup. My friends on Facebook also love rugby. I'm going to share this with my friends on Facebook. Imagine if the employees in your organization got these kinds of messages about inclusion efforts that they could, with one click, share with their larger communities who are not aware of your efforts, not aware of the challenges, not aware of the issues that the Aboriginal communities are facing in the employment world today. We could raise a lot more awareness. There was a study that was done by a consulting organization, an analyst group called the Altimeter Group. And what they looked at was what it takes to be prepared to engage in social media. And what they found was that there were really 4 distinct criteria for a prepared organization. And the first of these is that there are policies and people trained on the policies in the organization. that there be response matrices and processes, that there be ongoing education, and finally that there be a dedicated centralized social media hub. This speaking mostly to larger organizations. And if you look at the study they did of, I think it was 500 companies, very few qualified as prepared organizations. The 18 companies they identified as advanced were doing it, actually creating a baseline education process and establishing policies. Most of the rest weren't. The same with ongoing education, sharing of best practices. And the consequence of this is that the organizations that didn't train their employees and didn't get their employees engaged with external customers were the ones that were most inclined to experience a crisis. And there were 3 levels of crisis that they identified. 1 was bad press. 2 was bad press, plus we had to take some sort of action in response to the crisis. Think about Nestle having to change the palm oil sourcing for its Kit Kat bar based on Greenpeace activity on its Facebook page. The 3rd level is actual loss of money. Some of you probably know what Domino's went through a few years ago with the employees on the YouTube video putting food up their nose before they put it on the food, and people were disgusted. And during the quarterly earnings call following that, the chief financial officer actually reported how much money they lost because of that YouTube video. What the altimeter group found was that you could have avoided 76% of those crises, or at least minimized the impact of those crises considerably if your employees knew what the policies were trained on it, and were given access to social channels where they could go out there and represent the organization. If you think that bolting all the windows and locking all the doors is the way to avoid the problems and the risks that are inherent in social media, that simply flies in the face of all of the facts, all of the experience and evidence and research that we have seen. The companies that experience crises were primarily lacking internal education, more than any other single factor. If you are looking at spreading your diversity message, both to candidates that you would like to attract, to the general community, so that they understand that this is a value, so that this is actually the way we engage in business. It's not a campaign, it's not a program, it's not an initiative, it's just the way we do things around here. Getting your employees out there talking about these things because they are the most trusted, they are the most credible, is the most effective way that you can start to engage in social media. This is what the online training looks like at PepsiCo. It takes about 45 minutes, and every employee is going through this. The second tier for the ones who join the ambassadors group is face-to-face. Other organizations like Dell and Sprint and Coca-Cola take different approaches, but the objective is the same. The objective is have the employees talking about the organization and its values and its principles, rather than having it come out of the PR department as slick brochures and institutional advertising campaigns. So it was kind of tough to narrow what I was going to talk about into 45 minutes with so many different audiences and issues and challenges that you all are facing. This is what I chose to talk about, but I'm hoping we have a couple of minutes for some questions.